It's just gone lunchtime. This is All Angles here on eNCA. Good afternoon. I'm Manoqba. It is that time of the day when we give you an update on how far some of the stories we've been following up for you today have advanced. Here's your lunchtime update. Our reporters have been out and about bringing us the latest news on our top stories. Let's get an update now on those developments. I'm joined first by Moloto in Johannesburg. We've got Heidi Giokos in Boksburg, and Manoqba Mchunu is also in Johannesburg. Moloko, I'm going to start with you, of course, today, hearing that one of South Africa's freedom stalwarts, that's Essop Pahad, has passed away at the age of 84. He's expected to be laid to rest this afternoon.
That's very true, Macero. Indeed, the stalwart who spent much of his life in the trenches fighting the oppressive government, and of course in the dawn of democracy, he was in the presidency as the parliamentary councillor to the then deputy president of the Republic, Thabo Mbeki, until Mr. Mbeki became president himself, and we saw him elevating him to cabinet, making him the minister in the presidency. And he had been there for much of Mbeki's presidency, and he was among those cabinet ministers who resigned following the ANC's decision to fire Mbeki as president of the Republic. His death confirmed this morning, and we saw the statement from the president, who is also passing his condolences to the family of Pahad. And also we saw a statement from the Congress of the People's Dennis Bloom, who says that some of them in COPE worked together with him. Essop Pahad, of course, is the brother to another former cabinet minister, Aziz Pahad. If I am not wrong, he is the eldest. And of course, it would be important to kind of like get to understand in terms of the Muslim funeral rites what's going to happen. And we are joined now by the Imam Ibrahim Bam from the Council of Muslim Theologians. Thank you, sir.
Thank you for the opportunity. We obviously pass our condolence to the Pahad family with regard to the loss of Essop, and just previously, a week or two, another brother, also a comrade who had spent a lot of time in the effort. We offer our condolence. As far as Muslim rights is concerned, Muslims believe that death is not the termination of life. It is the beginning of another existence of life. So since you believe that it's not the termination of life, it's the beginning of another existence, we believe that we need to move the deceased to the next phase of existence as soon as possible. Thus you find Muslim funerals normally happening the very same day of the death. As such, therefore, Essop passed away earlier this morning, and the funeral is immediately on the very same day. The funeral itself is a very, very simple procedure. There is a bathing of the deceased, which took place earlier in the morning, and then he's shrouded in 3 pieces of white cloth. There is no expensive coffin that comes with it. The deceased is put in 3 pieces of white cloth, and thereafter there is a waiting period, and it is always recommended to do it as soon as possible. Obviously, because of Essop's profile, there might be certain speeches on behalf of the political life of his, but from the religious point of view, immediately after the shrouding, and there is a prayer that is performed. And in the prayer, we acknowledge the greatness of the Almighty. We also acknowledge our Prophet Muhammad and other prophets and messengers of the Almighty. And we pray for ourselves, for the forgiveness of ourselves and the deceased. So there is a specific short prayer that is done just before the burial. Immediately after the prayer, a burial takes place. And in the burial, in the grave, there is a niche that is where the body is placed towards the blessed city of Mecca. And the body is placed in that niche. And after the niche, when the body is placed, there is planks or something that protects the body from the ensuing dust or sand that will be thrown. That is protected, the body is protected, and afterwards sand is thrown over the grave. Now, normally in our tradition, the people, the community, the family members are the same people who will throw in the dust. And normally there is a very beautiful passage of the Holy Quran that is recited when we do throw the dust. Minha khalaqnakum, from dust we have been created, from dust do we return, and from dust will we be resurrected.
I'm interested in knowing about the significance of having to wash the body at least 3 times before burial.
Well, normally that is a procedure, and normally there is also a situation that during the course of illness there might be certain, oozing of certain like pus, blood, etc. So, firstly, it's a tradition, it's a command, and also during the course of sickness there might be certain, aspects with regard to the cleanliness or the leftovers of certain wounds, etc. So therefore it is recommended that there is a bathing period and a bathing of the deceased before we shroud the body.
All right, thanks.
All right, we're going to let Moloko continue with that press briefing by the Imam ahead of the funeral service of Essop Pahad. Of course, he passed away at the age of 84 earlier today. Let's go to Heidi now, who's covering another big story for us. 17 people have died due to gas leak in Boksburg. And Heidi, you've been investigating exactly what went on in that particular area. In terms of those you've spoken to, how are they describing what happened this morning, the scenes, or rather last night, the scenes, as they were confused as to why people were dropping on the ground?
Yes, exactly. So we do know it was definitely gas inhalation. One community member that we did get a chance to speak to has given us a different version of what they understand to have happened. So these gas cylinders that are used by illegal mining, they of course have to make sure that all the gas is outside of these cylinders, and then they use them to basically get the gold out. It's a whole process that happens, but I think from what the community member indicated to us was that what we do understand is there was still gas in one of the cylinders, and that what they normally do is they open up the gas cylinder and let the gas leave the cylinder, and they didn't realize that it was so strong, which obviously was deadly. 17 people have now tragically lost their lives due to that gas being opened up. We haven't received a confirmation as yet from authorities as to their version of what happened, but this is what community members are indicating to us. We do know that 11 people are admitted into hospital at the moment. They are all thankfully in critical condition. The youngest that has been admitted is 2 months old. We do know that she is responsive and breathing on her own, which is some good news. There's only one person out of the 11 in critical condition. The number was pushed up to 17 in total that lost their lives yesterday, because one person that was admitted to hospital sadly died throughout the course of this morning, we were told. So what we do understand now is that police and authorities are in the process of basically dismantling any kind of informal illegal mining operation that is happening, taking all operations and tools that are used during all of that. But I want us to listen to what the Provincial Police Commissioner had to say in terms of really trying to get to the bottom of illegal mining and the possible deployment of the SANDF should that come from the request of the Gauteng Premier Panyaza Lesufi.
Yesterday, the residents here, they've started to smell something funny. According to them, they say it smells like a rotten eggs. And they could see that it is from this shack. And they started whistling, and then some other community members responded. And the good thing is that, the wind was blowing this side. Anyway, not so good, but the wind was blowing that side. That is why they were not affected themselves. And there is also a small baby there in the shack behind where we are right now. Small baby. So when a certain community member, brave enough, thanks God, thanks to that particular community member, who managed to come here and find these gas cylinders. According to him, there were 3 which were opened. This one, I think, and also those other 2 there. And then that community member managed to close them down. Later on, they realized that a lot of people, they've collapsed along the way, and then they passed on. May their souls rest in peace.
All right, let's go to Manoqba Mchunu in Deep Sluice. And of course, Manoqba, we know that the protests in that area are not continuing for now, but of course, the fight isn't over, is it?
Well, Maseko, I can tell you that the protests have subsided here for now in Deep Sluice, and this is because of a meeting that was held here yesterday. In fact, we were told by residents that following the leaders' release yesterday at the Randburg Magistrates Court, there was a discussion among community members as to what's going to happen now to the protests. You recall that one of the clauses, if I may call it that way, the conditions of bail for these leaders is that they cannot partake in any acts of violence or be part of a gathering that seems to have public violence. So it really then means that the protests that we've seen here cannot continue in the form that we've seen it here in the community. Of course, many community members were quite adamant. In fact, yesterday they were insisting that they want to continue with their protests, but we understand that there was also talk from within that engagement that perhaps they need to give the engagements with the office of the president a chance to see how those unfold. But one thing that is certain, Masiko, is that residents are saying here that they're not going to stop fighting against crime in their community. They still want President Cyril Ramaphosa to come to this community and to listen to their concerns. We had a chance to speak to some of the residents today who are saying that they feel that they're not being taken seriously as far as the issue of crime is concerned, that people are robbed and killed in this community almost every weekend. In fact, we visited some of the families here. On Tuesday, there was a shooting that took place here, and a 34-year-old man was shot in that incident. We spoke to his mother earlier on, but it's not the only victim. A church nearby was robbed, and also some victims robbed apparently by the same group of armed robbers. So let's take a listen, Masiko, just to what residents are saying, especially this mother that we spoke to earlier on about what has happened to her. And this is in the midst of the community fighting to get the president to come here and for crime to be dealt with in the community.
A condition ya ngwana e bad because ngwana o ko theater ke motlogetse a le ko theater mabana ga ke boela ko Thembisa hospital still o sampana a le ko theater ba mpoditse gore ke phone before ke tla ko hospital ke butsitse gore ngwana o sa le ko theater ga ya setse a tswile ko theater ba mo ise ko ICU ke gona ka kgona go bona ngwana.
All right, that was your eNCA lunchtime update from all angles with reporters Manoqba Mchunu and Heidi Giokos. A little earlier, we had Moloto, who we are going back to now. He's in Johannesburg at the home of freedom stalwart and former minister in the presidency, Essop Pahad, who passed away at the age of 84 this morning. He is being laid to rest, according to Muslim rights, at around 2 o'clock this afternoon at the Westpark Cemetery. Moloko, I'm sure by this time there are dignitaries and delegates of the ANC, etc., who are arriving at that house.
Absolutely. In fact, I have just seen the widow of the former or the slain leader of the South African Communist Party, Chris Hani Dimpohane. She's just arrived here. But also Mr. Mavuso Msimang, who we know was a leader there during the Wanki and the Sipolilo incursions leading the Umkhonto West Sizwe fighters then in the 1960s. But let's speak to Mr. Maurizio Mariano, who is the close friend of the late Mr. Essop Pahad. Thank you, sir, for your time. My apology for butchering your name there.
No problem at all.
Your reaction upon hearing to the passing of your friend?
Well, being a very close friend of Uncle Essop, I've known that he's been ill for a long time, and we're very sad that he's passed away. But by the same token, his suffering has come to an end because the last few days were extremely difficult for him.
His suffering, you say, has come to an end, and of course we know he's going to be laid to rest within the 24-hour period. But let's take you back to when you first met him. When did you meet him? And take us through the journey of your friendship.
Well, I initially met him in the year 2000 because I'm part of an alliance called the Hellenic Italian Portuguese Alliance that works together with the African National Congress. And it was Uncle Essop's wish, together with the other members of the ANC, that minority groups work together with the government of the day. And that's how we began to work together. But from a, let's call it a working relationship, we became extremely good friends. I learned a lot from him because Uncle Essop was an intellectual. Uncle Essop was a true friend, and he was articulate, and you knew exactly where you stood with Uncle Essop.
Yeah, many of us would only know him because he was in government, and we could have related with him at that level. What is it that we may not know that you believe stood out in terms of his values, in terms of his convictions?
Well, I think the most important thing is the fact that Uncle Essop was an intellectual. So any single aspect that you wanted to know about political theory, Uncle Essop could answer your question. But as far as values are concerned, I know that Uncle Essop was extremely ethical, and his values were those of a true friend, of a man of integrity, and even though he came across many times as a hard person, deep down he was very soft, and it was a privilege and an honor to spend so much time with him over the past few years.
All right, Mr. Maurizio Mariano, who, as he said, was the friend of the late Essop Pahad. Let me also speak to the face that you certainly, many of you would be familiar with, Walter Mokoena. So, tell us about how you, as some of the people who have come here to convey your last respects, have taken the passing of Ntate Pahad.
Well, I'd like to send my deepest and sincere condolences to the family of Pahad, Meg, Gavin and Amina, the whole family, and the rest of the country who are mourning his passing. Well, Essop and I have been very close. In fact, you spoke to Maurizio. We had a grouping called the G3. Yeah. It was myself, Maurizio Mariano, and Dr. Pahad. We used to have lunch together every second Monday. Yeah. And yeah, we became extremely close. I last saw him on Friday. We spent 2 hours together. All right. Having a conversation, but may his soul rest in peace.
All right, Ntate Mokoena, I see the Premier of Gauteng as well as the Secretary of the ANC in the Gauteng province. I'm asking my colleague Mchunu to come closer. Perhaps we might get a word or so. Mr. Premier, we are live on eNCA. Your reaction to this?
To be quite frank, it's a painful way of ending a crucial chapter in the history of our country. Comrade Essop has been a pillar in the reconstruction drive of reconstructing our country post-apartheid. He has been a pillar in the ideological repositioning of the African National Congress. He has been a pillar in the establishment and strengthening of the African National Congress outside the borders of our country. And what we have now, literally, without exaggeration, what we have now in terms of any policy formulation in the economy, labor, trade, international relations, he had a hand in either crafting, working with the leadership, or consolidating the resolutions of the ruling party. So it's a painful way to depart on this Saturday, and for him to depart on this Saturday, and for us to be where we are. So we are just here to give support to the family, friends, and everyone.
And just quickly, Premier, as you reflect on the legacy of Pahad and where South Africa is now with our socioeconomic challenges, how would you reflect on where we are, where we're standing as a country right now?
Well, honestly, we're going through a bumpy ride. We're going through turbulences. We're going through difficulties. But we must also celebrate what we have, which is a strong foundation of democracy that can't be taken away from us by any other person, which is something that we need to appreciate. We can't take away the Bill of Rights, we can't take away the separation of power in terms of the legislature, in terms of the executive and the judiciary, which is a gift that I think that they've given us. But the challenges that we're going through is not challenges that are going to be permanent. We're going to defeat these challenges, and we're going to emerge and have a South Africa that all of us will appreciate and love. And we're just here to honor the family, for that the family must know that they had a giant, they had a powerful person, they had a visionary, they had a committed person, they had a knowledgeable person who shaped and sharpened the future of this country. And we are here to say thank you.
All right, the Premier of Gauteng Province, Panyaza Lesufi, accompanied by the Secretary of the ANC in the province of Gauteng, Mr. TK Nxisa. And he's saying that the family should know they have lost a giant. We know that Essop Pahad spent much time in the United Kingdom along with the former President Thabo Mbeki, who at the time was in exile in the United Kingdom. And as I said, as we know, upon their arrival back in South Africa at the dawn of democracy, when Mbeki was the deputy president, we saw Pahad being located in the presidency as the parliamentary councillor of the deputy president at the time. And you can bring him. We just want to speak to Mr. David Monyai. I'm just going to ask my colleague Mchunu to come to this side. So thank you so much. Give us a picture of Aziz Pahad, that perhaps now that he has departed, perhaps as the South African public we should really keep in mind.
He was a great committed comrade. One that committed his entire life, and he's within a youth movement of the 60s and 70s that took us to liberation and really led the country in the early phase of liberation, the 90s, the entire transition, constitution making, and being in the presidents under the leadership of President Thabo Mbeki. That in itself spoke a great deal of what kind of a person, particularly on key issues, gender. He was extremely committed on issues of gender equality, people with disability. I think in the president's, he also was leading in that regard, youth, and let us also not forget that he was a communist, so he was both ANC and SACP, and he led, and when the time came, when President Thabo Mbeki's presidency came to an end, he was one of those few ministers that peacefully steps aside and lived a very humble, easy life, but yet committed on a number of issues. We were particularly keen and witnessed his active involvement in the Concern African Forum. He had a magazine, The Thinker, which was deposited at the University of Johannesburg, the library, a powerful tool that he, beyond politics, as an intellectual giant, which continued. It's now an accredited journal at University of Johannesburg. He also was involved in a number of key issues, solidarity with Palestinians, issues whether it's Iraq or the current Ukraine and Russia conflict. He was in the forefront, putting in a Pan-Africanist as well as Africa-centered analysis on how we should respond as participants in the global peace and security.
Yeah, despite his colorful career in politics, in the struggle against the racist and oppressive government, however, there was some little bit of controversy, especially when it emerged that actually the controversial Gupta family, they first met him in India when he was still in the presidency, and he seems to have even elevated Ajay Gupta to be a member or board member of today's brand South Africa. That particular controversy, we all know what the Guptas are accused of and all that, and while there's no evidence of him perhaps participating in their corrupt activity, but the whole perception, how do, as he now departs, how do we now juxtapose that with his colorful career as a veteran of our struggle?
I think the entire Gupta saga has to be put in a context. He was leading the presidents and in charge of the business, having major investors coming from all over the world. And it is not only the Guptas that he invited to South Africa to do investments. Unfortunately, the Gupta issue seemed to be the key. And personally, I was privileged to work with him. He never gained anything from the Guptas. He had no control in terms of the business and the kind of activities that they were doing, whether they are guilty or not, something that we don't know. And therefore, I don't think we can hang the Gupta issue on the life of Comrade Essop Pahad. I think it's unfortunate that among many investors that he brought to South Africa, the Guptas ended up with this kind of a record, and the media constantly go to it. It's a burden of leadership. I think if people associate that with him, but he gained no single cent in terms of corrupt activities, and therefore I really do not think it's something that he mentioned in his book. There's a Committed to Life, the title of a new book that will come out next month or so. I think the nation, the continent, the world will have to read and make their own judgment in terms of his own views on this particular issue.
Having worked with him, I would presume that possibly you have had to spend time with him even after he has left public life. Do you know what his views were? If you look at the current situation in South Africa, the conditions economically, the difficulty that as South Africans we go through, and many other issues that make South Africans despondent. Do we know what his view was? Was he able to confide in people such as yourself who were closer to him?
Well, the beauty of Comrade Essop Pahad's life is of consistency. He has been consistent. If you follow his views in the 60s, 70s, 80s, up to now, is always progressive, with strongly committed to upliftment of people in South Africa and on the African continent. He was concerned, like most of our leaders, in terms of lack of development, issues on gender that he was committed, the youth in particular, and the need to really put African position on global issues. And he was concerned on Palestinian to an extent of supporting some Palestinian families on current kind of violation of Palestinians' rights in Palestine, in the current Palestinian-Israel conflict. And beyond that, he was also involved with so many other organizations on the Cuban crisis. Up to now, he was committed to that, Venezuela and Ukraine. It's one of those major issues that he consistently registered, the need to bring peace to Ukraine.
All right. Mr. Munyai, maybe remind us of who you are, by the way, for those who may just know you as David Munyai.
I'm an associate professor and the director for the Center for Africa-China at University of Johannesburg.
All right, thank you so much, associate professor at the University of Johannesburg. I'm just going to ask if he can come closer. Mr. Kachalia, from his member of Parliament for the Democratic Alliance. Sir, thank you so much. I'm not too sure whether you are here representing the DA or as a friend, perhaps as an acquaintance.
I'm here in my personal capacity because our families, the Pahad family and the Kachalia families, go back a very long time. My late father and Essop's father were firm friends. Although Essop was considerably older than I am, our families grew up together, and it is indeed a sad day when a close acquaintance and friend of our joint families passes, and that's why I'm here to pay my respects to the family.
For us as outsiders who only get to know and read about Pahad through the media, really, give us a picture of who he was from a close-range point of view.
Essop grew up in an intensely political family. His mother used to feed people of the struggle in those days. Everybody, Mandela, Sisulu, everybody ate at Amina Pahad's home. And as a result, Essop grew up in that, and Aziz grew up in that milieu. I got to know Essop particularly when I was a student in London. And Essop was exiled at that particular point. I got to know him better then, and of course later he went on to become a member of parliament and a minister in the presidency. Essop was an interesting man. He was close to Thabo Mbeki, and he was a forthright person. I didn't always agree with him. In fact, I disagreed with him on a number of occasions about many things. But there you have it. That was Essop.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Khalid Kachalia, who is a member of parliament for the Democratic Alliance, but he says he's here on his personal capacity as a family friend. Of course, Essop Pahad was also a communist, having served his entire life as a member and leader of the South African Communist Party. I'm now joined by the leader of the South African Communist Party in South Africa, the party's General Secretary, Mr. Solima Paila. Your reactions following the passing of one of your leaders?
Yeah, firstly is to send our sincerest condolences to the family and the comrades of Comrade Essop Pahad and the people of South Africa that he served so well with distinction. Throughout his life, Essop has known nothing except to serve the people of our country. He has given his best. We want to thank him as well for his contribution. But it's a sad day for the family that, and also for us as a movement, that we are losing some of our greatest intellectuals, strategists of our movement at the most difficult period of our revolution. But we want to wish the family more strength during this difficult time. But for Essop, he has served his time quite well to the Communist Party, to the ANC, and to the people of the world. He was a towering intellectual, well recognized internationally for his incisive views and positions, and for that we'll always miss.
Having worked in government, in the presidency as an advisor to the then President Thabo Mbeki, and later he was promoted to cabinet as a minister. And fast forward to this present day with the challenges that are confronting South Africa, do you know what his views were as the party? Were you in touch with him?
Well, about the current conditions, obviously, he was quite concerned about the deepening crisis of inequalities, especially the poverty levels amongst the poor people in our country. And as a leader of the Communist Party, he always put his contributions towards resolving the primary questions affecting the working class. As you know, he served until his last day as a leader of the Communist Party. He always thought that we could come with innovative solutions to the current challenges facing our people as a whole, particularly tackling the current economic system, the capitalist system that continues exploitation of the people of our country.
Mr. Solima Paila, the General Secretary of the South African Communist Party, we thank you, sir, for your time. Of course, some of the mourners and well-wishers continue to arrive here. I'm not too sure who is going to be disembarking out of this black car, but I'm told by an official from the Luthuli House that this is the first Deputy Secretary General of the African National Congress, Nomvula Mokonyane. Some of those who are already in Masero include the widow of the slain SACP General Secretary Chris Hani Dimpohani, but as well as the Premier of Gauteng and the Secretary of the ANC in Gauteng Province. Ma'am, thank you so much. Let me hijack you before you go in. All right, she is not prepared to speak to us now. We will respect that. And we don't know when Masero, the procession to the cemetery, will leave from here. What we know, as was confirmed by the Imam who was speaking to us a little bit earlier, is that the burial must happen at least within the 24-hour period. And he has taken us through the Muslim funeral rites, the importance of having to wash the body. And you heard him there that it must also be washed at least 3 times before burial. And that depending really on the need, but also that the body must be covered with white cloths. And as you can understand, this is certainly a type of work that is sacred in its own nature. We await to hear what will be happening going forward, Marcel.
And Moloko, just for us to stay on those visuals, especially because we expect the funeral, if I'm understanding it correctly, to start somewhere between 2 o'clock and 2:30 at the Westpark Cemetery. So I'm going to try and keep you on, Moloko, as more and more people arrive there at his home in Emerentia. You know, just you and I to talk about some of the things that we know about Essop Pahad. For instance, with me, with regards to what he said during a media interview after the previous government elections, those were the general ones, when he realized, or rather the municipal ones, when he realized that the DA is starting to have a bit of more of a stronghold in terms of Johannesburg and the city of Tshwane. He called that a nightmare, if I remember correctly, in that particular interview, saying that he's hoping that in 2021 he doesn't have to relive that nightmare again to see them get more and more votes from South Africans. But of course, we saw that happening. And I wonder if he, you know, was the type of ANC stalwart. Of course, his blood will always be green, black and gold. But I wonder if he was the type of stalwart who was happy with where the party was today.
Well, Masero, obviously, Essop Pahad, having been minister in the presidency, you would recall that at the time, his portfolio included communications, government's communication. And that already tells you that this is somebody who was passionate about communicating programs of government. And there's no doubt that he certainly believed in the trajectory at the time of what the government he was minister in was doing. And as someone who was at that particular level, certainly he wouldn't have liked to see the governing African National Congress, which he had been part of for so many years, losing power in some particularly strategic areas such as Tshwane and Johannesburg, as you say. However, one would believe that he ought to have been a Democrat, and he ought to have accepted, as much as he possibly did not agree with some of the power changes, but as a Democrat, as somebody who had fought for the liberation of this country, he ought to have accepted. Of course, we have also seen the General Secretary of the SACP going in. This is because, obviously, Essop Pahad, while he was still a member of the ANC, on the other hand, he was also a prominent member and leader of the South African Communist Party. And going back to the point you were making, really, we saw after he left cabinet, after he resigned following the ANC's decision to fire Thabo Mbeki as president of the republic, also he resigned and he never went back really to government, while we saw some of the people who resigned at the time, they were brought back to the National Executive Council when former President Jacob Zuma took over as the head of state.
And that says a lot, right, Moloko, in terms of him deciding that he won't come back. And I remember when he did resign after those 8 days in September that Reverend Frank Chikane wrote about, he was talking about how he wasn't, in agreement with that decision by the NEC to axe President Thabo Mbeki. But also, he spoke at length, Moloko, especially looking at the things that he studied in university, including the University of Sussex in England. I understand that his paper was about Indian people being leaders in the South African context, and he voiced out during that time that Thabo Mbeki was axed or was asked to step down. He voiced out the danger among some ANC members and branches that were talking about it's been too long since we've had Xhosa leaders. It's time now to have a leader from another ethnic group, and he was saying it's very dangerous to ethnicize policies of the ANC.
Well, it's small wonder, Masero. I mean, Essop Pahad and Thabo Mbeki were friends. They lived together in the United Kingdom, as you say. Both of them went to Success University. And that already tells you that when Mbeki was fired, he definitely was not going to be happy. But let me speak to the gentleman here before I speak to the Deputy Secretary General of the ANC. Sir, if you can introduce yourself and tell us your views following the passing of Mr. Pahad.
Yeah, Professor Chris Landsberg from the University of Johannesburg, Head of Diplomacy and Foreign Policy at UJ.
Tell us about how you knew Mr. Pahad, how far do you come in terms of your relationship with him?
It's very interesting the comment you made. You said when President Mbeki was recalled, he wasn't going to stand for it. He was the first minister to quit. He's actually the first minister of the group that decided to leave government because he felt it was unconstitutional. I mean, what can you say about Essop Pahad? A deeply principled man, a man with a formidable intellect, a fearless man, I mean, to the point of being intimidating. He wasn't responsible for communications in government. He was actually the minister in the presidency. So he had quite a number of portfolios.
And I was just saying GCIS fell under his...
And guess what? Since then, because of this whole thing that, because my predecessor stood for certain things, I'm going to get rid of it. Government is now struggling to revive some of these structures, eh? And I want to fall back on them. But let's not talk about that right now. It's not the time. Here's for me the analogy. If President Mandela and his government were the nation builders, then President Mbeki and his government were the state builders. And Essop Pahad was instrumental in putting in place state structures. You just mentioned GCIAs, coordination of local government, coordinated government and so on. And then a man with unstinting international values. That group, that generation prided themselves on the ideology of progressive internationalism, of which anti-war stands out like a pole above waters. Principled people. They stood for a number of values that they would just not compromise on, willing to die for the cause.
Well, Prof, I cannot not ask you to make comparison of what you are telling us at the time of Essop Pahad and the situation now.
No, I think there's no secret. There's no secret. He was disappointed. I think he was particularly disappointed about what he would call a deficit of leadership. But guess what? They would never bring themselves to leave the movements that they were members for. They were just too principled and ethical No, but fiercely disappointed. Today we're talking about a hollowed out state. Then we talked about a strong state that had the hallmarks of becoming a developmental state. So my last parting shot would be, a baobab tree has fallen. And I don't know how quickly we're going to build baobabs in this country, because we sorely need them.
The mighty baobab tree has fallen. That's according to Prof. And standing here is the second Deputy Secretary General of the first Deputy Secretary General. She is reprimanding me, Masero, that she is not the second deputy. But ma'am, on a serious note, you are here to also pass your message of condolence.
Thank you very much. And firstly, on behalf of the ANC, its leadership and its entire membership and supporters, we want to once more convey our sincere condolences to the Pahad's family. We know that just a few days ago, we laid to rest the youngest brother, Junaid, who passed on. And we are here today to bid farewell to Comrade Essop Pahad, a veteran of our struggle. We were honored together with Comrade SG to have visited the family, accompanied by Comrade Jerry Machila, ambassador, and received by Comrade Faisal Randera, the wife, and the children. All of them were there last night. We all did not expect that today will be gathered to bid a farewell to Comrade Essop. But because we are here now, we wish that his soul rest in peace, that we continue to have a relationship of the tripartite alliance that he so dearly worked for in building, but also in leading, that we work towards a renewed relationship of the tripartite alliance. And we also strengthen our capacity of leading South Africa, as he has also been a champion for the reconstruction and development of our country.
As he now transitioned to the afterlife, what are the values that you really believe that South Africans ought to be holding on to, which you believe he embodied?
Selflessness. He was very selfless. Somebody who will go an extra mile, embracing the spirit and the culture of non-racialism, detesting any form of discrimination, somebody who never abused his position of power and proximity to leadership, and someone who even now, last night we couldn't talk to him, but we saw him. The last time we were together with him was at Comrade Aziz Pahad's place, and all the elders were there, including himself. And he actually said, "Hey, Luna, I want to have a boss berad with you." And we believe that this is the boss berad he wanted. He said, "I want to have a boss berad with all of you officials. We need to talk, we need to work together." And from there he crossed his legs and put his hand on his cheek, and he said, "Fikile and Nomvula, we must meet soon." And this is soon.
Do you have any idea what he had wanted to talk to you about?
He was very passionate about the outcomes of the conference and those 6 priorities, including what was presented through Comrade Mek Maharaj coming from the veterans. And that for the good of the African National Congress, we came back from the Lekgotla after the Congress. And those 6 priorities are the priorities that we now have put as priorities for this year and going towards 2024. So the issue was, let's take these priorities and put them into action. And Comrade Essop wanted to be part of that journey. And hence he said, I want to have a boss berad with all of you because it's time to work now.
DSG,
you know, one of the things that Medim Pohani mentioned was the fact that, you know, there may not be another Essop Pahad, but at least you as the ANC leadership should try and emulate him. This weekend, you're even having an ANC NEC, the core values that you believe you should be taking forward and the key challenges that the movement is confronted with, the end of an era.
A very important thing that one has been reflecting on. It's a leader who's able to transcend across generations. Comrade Essop will become a friend, will become a leader. So we need leaders who can relate with everybody. Secondly, somebody who valued the values of a non-racial society. Something that we are very challenged on as the organization. The issues of unity. He had serious issues about the state of organization, but he was very clear that it is only through a renewed African National Congress that we can be able to take South Africa beyond where it is today. It's an end of an era. Of course, as the message that Comrade President Cyril Ramaphosa has conveyed, we know that he's out of the country, and Comrade Paul, our Deputy President, is the acting president. The very message that the void that he has left, it's going to be a difficult void to fill. We will take from those 6 priorities, and we wish every member of the ANC can appreciate and understand the importance of those 6 priorities as the Pahad's wishes for the movement.
All right. Thank you so much, Ms. Nomvula Mokonyane. Well, I'm going to ask myself quickly, Mokhomutsi, to show you what looks like the hash. And it just arrived here at the family house of Mr. Pahad. And we don't know what will be happening. Obviously, the observation of the Muslim burial rites will have to be observed there. And later on today, that at least we know for a fact that he will have to be taken to the Westpark Cemetery. That's where his body will be buried. And at this point in time, we are not sure. We're waiting to see how this is going to unfold going forward. But it would seem that all along, the body was not in the house. And I'm being corrected, actually. I'm being corrected that the body is in the house. This is the hash that presumably is going to be transporting the body to the cemetery.
All right, Moloto, live for us there in Emerentia in Johannesburg. He's outside the home of former minister in the presidency and freedom stalwart Essop Pahad, who passed away this morning at the age of 84. And as you heard from Moloko there, that's the hearse that is expected to take his remains and transport him to the Westpark Cemetery here in Johannesburg, where he'll be laid to rest at the Heroes Acre, and that's where most of our country's freedom stalwarts are laid to rest. And those who have flown the South African flag high are actually laid to rest. So Moloko has been speaking to quite a number of people who have arrived at his home and are going to be going to the funeral. I heard the Imam a little earlier on telling Moloko that there will be people who will say a few words or speeches at that particular service. We saw the arrival of the first Deputy Secretary General of the ANC, Nomvula Mokonyane, which is the latest person that Moloko spoke to. She speaks, of course, about the end of an era, really, for the ANC when it comes to the type of leaders in the caliber of people such as Essop Pahad. He was the minister in the presidency during the time that Thabo Mbeki was president of this country. That was particularly between 2004 and 2008. And of course, he was also actually placed in the presidency when Nelson Mandela was still the president of this country and Mbeki was serving as his deputy. He's a very close confidant front of President Thabo Mbeki, or former President Thabo Mbeki. He also is a person who assisted quite a lot, and we heard this from Bradan Moyani as well, who comes on at 3 o'clock here on Today, that he assisted quite heavily with the 2010 FIFA World Cup that came to South Africa. That was a joyful time in our country, and he had been one of the instrumental people who was campaigning for us to actually host the World Cup, I think since around 2008. And finally in 2010 we were able to host the World Cup, and he was an instrumental figure in assisting SAFA, that's the South African Football Association, in terms of us hosting that very important event. But as you heard, one of the things I remember quite clearly about Essop Pahad was the fact that he spoke quite clearly about not adding ethnicity as a part of the problem in the ANC, because all of their blood is supposed to be black, green and gold. And this was during a time when some branches were complaining about the ANC having too many Xhosa presidents, and that a Zulu one should be given a chance. But of course, that's not the main reason why we saw the ousting of President Thabo Mbeki back in those 8 days in September. And he resigned just a few days later after he was ousted, pertaining to the decision by the National Executive Committee.